Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 109 of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. And tonight, we're going to be looking at the social credit system, which is already in play in China. But we're going to look at the evidence tonight of it creeping outside the borders of China and being introduced initially by stealth in the West, and in particular in the UK. So before I introduce my guest tonight, Dr. Graham Downing, let me take a look at this trailer for the 21st century version of Minority Report.
A friend writes to me, "There's something foreign looming on the horizon, and we can only guess that it will shape us entirely one day."
2013 is really when it took off. The police department came up with more than 400 individuals who were most likely to be prone to violence, either as a victim or a perpetrator, and they were chosen through mathematical algorithms.
A prediction is being made about something an individual has not yet done but is going to do. And a preemptive arrest is made of someone before they've performed an act.
Wollen wir in eine Gesellschaft geraten, die komplett überwacht ist, wo jeder seinen Score bekommt, so wie es eben die Chinesen vorhaben? Wollen wir in so einer Gesellschaft leben? Und die Frage ist, warum tun wir das?
Who is that good for? Is it good for the streets or is it good for the police?
They haven't told us what the algorithm is that they're using to identify people. There's no way to get off the list once you're on it.
It's the securitization of our society. It's not aiming to a certain future. The future is already in the present right now.
Die Überwachung ist nur und alleine dafür da, in ihre Zukunft steuernd und regelnd einzugreifen.
This is the new world, and right now, the policymakers haven't really thought through the consequences. They haven't figured out how do privacy laws adapt. And it's important, I think, to ask these questions now.
What about when they got your son? When they got your daughter, your child, when it's you? It don't affect nobody until it come knocking on your door.
I think we're at the very beginning of a very big conversation.
I think we are indeed at the beginning of a very big conversation. So, Graham, Dr. Graham Downing, thank you for joining me again this evening. I mean, you're becoming an extremely regular guest, but that's well deserved because you are right on point on the research of the impact of the coming artificial intelligence agenda and what that means in terms of impact on society as a whole. And, you know, we heard in that clip just now that this is about the securitization of society. But the securitization for whom?
Well, I mean, that intro, that trailer for what looks to be a very powerful documentary, it kind of struck a chord with me because I think if you speak to anyone that does this work or anyone that dares to sort of just do a little bit of research and not just take what's fed to them, they all, you know, the actual feeling, the mood, how people feel about this new technology and how it may be misused is summed up in the atmosphere in that intro. And it looks an incredibly powerful documentary. And there are many things in there, some of which are a bit too complex to get into this evening. I think, Ian, you may be doing another talk, I think, in London, and I think I'm going to probably flesh some of those things out that we're setting that. It requires a lot more build up, if you like.
Yeah, we're going to talk about AV 9.1 a little later on this evening.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think we'll do that then. But what we're seeing now is we're seeing all the pieces of the pie, all the different ingredients from the cake. They've all been kind of separate, and we kind of saw something's happening in one area, maybe there's a bit of censorship in another area, and then maybe there's new technology which kind of threatens a job over here. And now you start to see it coalesce into what they're now calling the fourth industrial revolution, which is the new place we're all going to be taken to, the new society. And as we move through some of these slides, and obviously with your recent experience in the court scene, I think we'll flesh some of that out.
Well, I think the crucial issue here is that it's the recognition that people aren't going to embrace this new industrial revolution, this technological revolution. And, I think there's obviously tremendous concern, and we saw this in Brzezinski's book, Between Two Ages, which he wrote, 50 odd years ago now, that basically the technocrats know that not everyone's going to be coming along willingly, and so they now are starting to roll out the tools to deal with those who might dissent the agenda. And of course, we mentioned China, but we'll look more at China in a while. But I mean, let's have a look, because you've given me some slides here, and Facebook and Apple are already trying out. I won't say necessarily it's a beta test stage, but they're already trying out their trust scores.
Yeah, and as with everything, when something is introduced with all this technology, it's going to be a problem for you. It's always to help you. And in regards to Facebook, this new trust score, well, it's to really make sure that you're not condemning posts when they don't need to be condemned. So it's a way of checking that. And with Apple, well, it's just a way of checking how many calls you're making sure you're we can ID you, that you are the real person who should be using, this technology, and all this kind of stuff. In reality, they've got other ways of doing that. And, there's unique identifiers, for example. They don't need to be kind of logging how many calls you're making. And it's also the same with smart meters. Smart meters are there to do, to make sure you don't spend too much on your bills, and it's energy conservation, all the rest of it. But it's not about that. What this is always a little gift they give you. In reality, it doesn't turn out to be that way. And with smart meters, most of the bills have gone up, as far as I know. But what happens is it's all about gathering data. And what people need to now start understanding is all the stuff they've done. There was an extended video we could have played, but obviously time limits that. And it's a Stanford professor. He went through the footprint, the digital footprint that everyone has left. Let alone what you're going to do in the future. And already, your score's in. They have an incredibly accurate profile of who you are. And there's incredible technology there, just by how you like on Facebook, just the things you click. The AI they've got, the technology can hone you pretty well in terms of your political bias, your sexuality, what color you are, and all this kind of stuff. And all of this stuff is a virtual representation of you, which is codified into a score. And when you get this score, if you're on the wrong side of the fence, then you're put into the sin bin, as we see in China now, with disastrous consequences. And if you keep yourself on the right side of the fence, you be a good boy or a good girl, and then you're allowed to play.
But to some extent, we already have the the early stages of it. I mean, even with a credit rating score, I mean that's the kindergarten of social credit. But I mean, obviously, it's going to go a whole lot further, and and obviously with Facebook, I mean the fact that basically I get 1 day every week max in which to post, because as soon as I'm out of the sin bin for whatever reason, I'm straight back in. And, obviously for anyone who posts anything that is critical of Israel, then the likelihood is that they're going to be in the sin bin almost instantaneously, because, nobody is allowed to have a counter view, despite the fact the UN have multiple resolutions condemning Israel's occupation. The globalist view is that Israel is beyond criticism, and that's borne out with the way in which Facebook reacts to anything that's posted. But let's move on. Let's come to the next slide here. So, here we've got the AI. Basically, this is out of China, and this is out of Shanghai Jiao Tong University. So just talk us through this, Graham.
Well, I found it interesting. I mean, some of the slides that I'm showing you, I kind of tucked away, in a PowerPoint presentation I was going to give but never got the chance to give, maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, and I wanted to bring them up again to show you how we've kind of moved on, because and everyone has that moment of reality where we start to look around and think, damn, Minority Report seems so futuristic. Now, it doesn't seem that anymore. We seem to have moved along so fast. And obviously to the right there, you've got, and that's actually from a paper, from a scientific paper, where not just they're scanning you, but they're scanning you to see if you look like a criminal. All right, and this is most of this work. Well, a lot of this work is coming out of China. We can understand why now with what they're doing over there. And then, so that's at the top, and that's a few years ago. Then you look at the bottom, and you've got the bottom left now. India is trying to, create a kind of biometric ID bank for everybody in its country, which is a massive undertaking. And they're actually doing. I'm not going to say they're doing a good job of it, but they're actually, they've gathered a huge numbers of data from their populace. And one of the things that they said they wanted to use it for is they have to give people free food. Obviously, there's a huge amount of number of poor people in India, and so that everyone who should be getting free food should be getting it, and people who shouldn't be getting it. But the technology doesn't work that well, and then people are queuing up all day just to get a bit of rice, and they're complaining. They want to go back to the old way, which is using paper. And then on the right of that, you see a kind of a current day picture of China, where you see actual live time data, where people are being tracked, their identity is instantaneously known, and these people there isn't a universal credit score yet, as far as I understand. Different areas of China are testing out their own kind of versions of it. But you see from a few years ago to now how rapid and how quick this stuff has been used. And and the key about this is, and I always say about this, because people will say, well, the technology is not that developed. We can't really do as much as we think we can do, at the moment. You don't have to have it work 100%, because as long as the people who are using it believe it works, it will be implemented. And the problem is, Ian, is that studies show that there is bias in this. So, for example, if your face happens to look like a criminal and you're not, well, you're stuffed, because there's bias built into the software. And if you're in a town where typically there might be crime, then there's bias built into the software. And it's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is the issue. And of course, that can be abused as well. So it's not just a flaw, it's something that can actually be abused, to cause issues with people's civil liberties.
Well, my understanding is that there is a trial version of the social credit system in China. Now, China's a nation of some 1 billion plus people. And the figure that I have in my head, so I must have seen it relatively recently, is that 7.2 million people are effectively on the shit list in China. And these people are prevented from taking domestic flights. They're prevented from booking business class tickets on the rail network. And they're prevented from driving on some of the autoroutes there. So, I mean, it may be limited at the moment, just to sort of see whether or not this social credit system is a motivator for people to come back on board and start towing the party line, or whether it actually galvanizes them into greater action. But it goes beyond that, doesn't it? Because in your next slide here, here's an academic paper where there is the discussion, this is from Carnegie Mellon University, where they're looking at brain patterns and effectively using brain patterns as predictive for behavior.
Sure, because one might say, well, okay, if this technology is going to come in and be enforced, well, then we can at least have our own thoughts and no one's going to know what we think. Well, good luck with that one, because this technology, relatively embryonic, but still still relatively pretty powerful, and what they're doing now. I mean, obviously they've got to use a lot of expensive equipment, and this isn't going to be portable yet. But this eventually will become portable technology, and what they can do is they can. And once again, let's say, for example, well, it doesn't ever become this amazing thing where you can just instantly read someone's thoughts like you might see in a sci-fi movie. But once again, it can be misused because people can start to overthink its ability, and that can be another issue. And if you read in, it's difficult for me to read, but the quote there, what I think there's right at the end, the last 2 or 3 lines. Well, maybe I can read it. This particular researcher from this College of Humanities and Social Sciences, that should scare most people. He said this technology has made enough progress that, quote, machine learning algorithms with brain imaging technology can effectively read minds. That's a very bold statement for a scientist to say. And of course, there's the rule that always says that the technology is probably a lot more advanced than what they're actually letting on. And you're absolutely, well, I mean, this kind of stuff has been going on for a long time in China. I mean, it's not new. I think since the 11th century, there's been some kind of version of watching over the populace and reporting back. But they do seem to be the world leaders at the moment. And lots of people see what's happening in China as a template for the rest of the world.
No, absolutely. So, well, this is from the New York Post. Artificial intelligence is coming for both judges and defendants. And of course, as I become increasingly familiar with the legal system in this country, particularly the civil courts, I might argue that I might as well be up against artificial intelligence right now. But, when we have statements such as it's time for our justice system to embrace artificial intelligence, I mean, this goes way beyond the computer say no.
Yeah, and this is, I'll give it to you. I'll give you the Cliff Notes, okay? Human decision making is going to be removed from every facet of life. AI will be taking over pretty much everything. Now, you can argue about the timescale, and you can even argue whether it's possible or not. But the movers and shakers, that's their goal, okay? That's just one of the goals. Now, AI is moving into the UK as well. We've got some American references there, and they're already using it to try and predict, well, certainly in the States, whether someone might jump bail or not, things like that. But what's going to happen is if you at AV, I think it was 9 or 8, can't remember. I did a workshop, and I have mentioned this before. We took a philosophical conundrum, and we discussed this. And in the end, we developed and added more problems into this problem, this philosophical problem. And then we looked at how AI would handle it, because we had data on that, and then how the audience in the room, there's about 30, 40 people in the workshop, how they would handle it. And it was incredibly powerful because it demonstrated very quickly the difference between AI and a human. Humans have compassion in how they make decisions, overwhelmingly. Obviously, there are sociopaths and psychopaths. That's a different argument. But AI doesn't. AI is ruthless. And the justification for bringing it into the justice system will be, already they are proving it can make similar decisions if you give it all the data. And in addition, it will be probably less biased than a human. And in reality, it will be able to call up data and remember things better than a human. And all this sort of stuff will be brought forward. So in the end, the poor human judge will have to move to the side. And if you think you're going to get a fairer shake of the whip, as it were, you're wrong, because this stuff will be brutal and ruthless. And of course, Ian, as you know and have been reported in the UK column, there probably won't be courts. It will all be done virtually. And then, if the scoring is brought to such a level, well, there will be a nanosecond between you falling foul of this system and then you being dealt with. And this is the problem. As you start to create this perfect system and you start to remove humans and the compassion that humans bring, you start to bring into this incredibly dystopian world where you can't move an inch or do anything without something measuring how perfect or how wrong you are.
Instantaneous justice. And, we have the usual suspects at work. Let's bring up this slide, because regular viewers of UK column news will be very familiar with Open Democracy, which, of course, is effectively funded by George Soros.
Yes, and this is an interesting article. This is one of the first articles I saw, because what's been picked up by others, and I think UK column have said this, we're moving out of the world of law and international law into a world of rules and regulation, because AI works very well with regulation, okay? And this world with regulations will be the world for the world citizens, will be the rules for the world citizenry. Okay, then, the national boundaries are going to be removed. We all know that's in the process of happening, or they want that to happen. You're all going to be a world citizen, and you're all going to have certain rules and regulations to follow. And this article makes the case that everybody wants that. Brexit was a terrible thing. It was a mistake. Everybody wants to live in a world where there's just rules and regulations. It's a much better world than having sort of, governments. And this also, if you look back to the roots and the birth of technocracy in the 1930s in Columbia University, you see this kind of concept where they don't want people around. They don't want officials. What they want is science, well, kind of technicians. And now what was really interesting... Yeah, technocrats. And what was really interesting was they didn't really have the technology to do it then, but they do now. But I don't know if you're aware, Ian, but in the same area that they were in this kind of it was kind of like a basement they gave them to get on, do their, and construct their philosophy or their textbooks, whatever they were doing down there. Also, they were at one end. The other end was IBM, computer technology, and you start to see just how maybe this was born and why it was born, because they were probably looking a long time into the future. Well, maybe not that long, because how many years is it now? 80 odd years. And they saw the potential of computer technology where they are now. Now, this is, I mean, what this is, as everyone knows, it's like communism on acid. It really is. And I don't want to live in a world where it's all rules and regulations, where everything is measured to the nth degree, and if you, God forbid, you even look like you're going to do something wrong, you've been given a sin bin point. We need some leeway. We need to have free will. We need to be able to make some mistakes. I mean, obviously, no one should be going around murdering anyone. We're not saying that, but this is going to be an absolutely impossible place to live.
Well, Brzezinski makes the observation in Between Two Ages, and he says that when the technocratic agenda is fully introduced, he said that the world will be controlled by technocrats who are not constrained by traditional liberal values. And when you reflect on that statement, I mean, that's extremely dystopian.
I mean, exactly. What does that mean? I mean, it's obvious what it means. It's a rhetorical. What it means is, if you aren't part of the system, you're gone.
Exactly.
There's no compassion. There's nothing. It's what you live in. See, when you don't have free will and you don't have the ability to make mistakes as a human does, then you're just a cog in you're just a part of a machine. That's all you are. And this is where we are headed. And it's even worse than that, which we don't have time to get into today. It's even worse than that, if it could be worse than that. And we're not saying this because we want people to be scared to do nothing. It's because you really do have to start standing up now for humanity. And anyone who's sitting on the fence, please stop sitting on the fence. You're about a minute to midnight with this. I mean, it couldn't be any more obvious what is coming down the pipe.
Well, I mean, in fact, let's go back to this slide here, because the quote that you've lifted there is that to achieve the agenda, they say that many people need to undergo training and later work as educators and community organisers to create and maintain a positive social climate. And of course, that is basically straight out of the Common Purpose playbook. Educators and community organisers. This is the little Hitlers, to use a 20th century phrase. People who basically outside of this particular arena would be perhaps inconsequential, but they seek the greater role, and so they effectively sacrifice their own humanity to be able to go into a role where they serve the masters.
Yeah, and we have mentioned this guy before, and this is a PhD that writes often for the Basic Income Earth Network. Those are the people driving for basic income, because as people should know, most of your jobs are going to go. It's going to go to AI. That's pretty much established now. And when they go, you need a basic income. And then once you get your basic income, you're going to have to undergo training, and the whole new social contract starts. And this is, we've evolved away from that. We certainly don't want to go back to that. And then and there's a lot more to be said about that, but for another show. And then above you see ID 2020 that wants to give everybody an ID by 2020. They're probably a bit late on that, thank God. And then everybody can be tracked from the cradle to the grave, and everything you do, all your medical records, everything, you can all go through these wonderful organizations like UNICEF and all these other people, and Bill Gates' organization, Gavi, they're all involved in this, and they can track you and see that you're matching up to their standard. Well, who elected these people in charge of us? Who elected this guy here to tell us how we're going to live? I didn't see anybody knock on anyone's door and say, "Oh, by the way, we're going to completely radically change the way you live." How do you feel about it?
Well, as we'll see later, it's actually well documented as to who writes the agenda. So let's look at Future City 3.5, and actually the 3.5 could be an interesting observation because there was an episode of Black Mirror, which is a Netflix series, and I believe the episode that I'm referring to, I believe was episode 1 of series 3, and it is about the social scoring system. And I would absolutely encourage it. All you got to punch in is Black Mirror Social Credit or series 3, episode 1. It's freely available on a stream. And here there were gated communities where, to be able to rent an apartment in these gated communities, you had to be a sort of 4.5 out of 5. And, so for those people who were rated below 4.5, there was already some limitations on their access to gated communities. But in certain cities, then you had to have a rating of 3.5 to even reside in the city.
Well, that's very interesting because Ian, I haven't watched that series, and I did choose that slide. And on that, if you click on that, there's a list of some of the developments that are going on. There's more than that. And my view was, independent of you just told me that, was that what will happen is exactly what you've just said. What's going to happen is that in order to get the prize of living in the bubble cities, which Bill Gates is developing and other people, you're going to need to have an acceptable social credit score. I would suggest, I could be completely wrong, and I'll be more than happy to be completely wrong. And also, there may be quite a price with that as well. As you can see presently, some of those to live there cost quite a bit of money, $1.5 to $2 million.
Absolutely, because part of the social credit and maintaining that social credit will be to be mixing with the people who are at the high end, and by default, those who are in the 4.5 and above category will arguably be the those who play the system and are able to generate material wealth. I'll put the link beneath this episode on YouTube. I'll put the link to that episode of Black Mirror because it is absolutely well worth watching. So
there's obviously more than one of us who are thinking along the same lines.
Oh, absolutely. And one can argue that, of course, by putting it out on something like Netflix, it's part of the programming. It's part of raising the sort of awareness of this, so that when it actually does manifest, people go, "Oh, yeah, I see how that works." But I implore people to watch that episode. It's about an hour long. To watch it to the end, because it does have a very interesting conclusion. And anyway, let's move on to the next slide here. This is very topical. Immunologist slams anti-vaccine billboard as almost organized terrorism. Now I'm very familiar with this tag of terrorist, domestic terrorist. In England, the anti-fracking community are still regarded as domestic extremists. In Scotland, of course, Nicola Sturgeon was put on the spot and stated in the Scottish Parliament that the anti-fracking community should not be regarded as domestic extremists and certainly not domestic terrorists. But this is how, obviously, the vocabulary is being manipulated. And you've got the quote here. John Fraser, the Dean of the University of Auckland's Faculty of Medical and Health Sciences and an immunologist with more than 35 years' experience, said the billboard was underhanded and deceitful and almost organised terrorism. So you can see that is meant to have a chilling effect on people who are perhaps considering the wisdom of vaccinating their children.
I mean, this the reason why I put this up, and then the one below it, Ian, which I hope you can read, it's a bit difficult for me, it's small on my screen, is because what this is the perfect example. Not in the future, not on some Black Mirror episode, but now, if you dare to question something, others think that you shouldn't be questioning. Well, it's not, well, we disagree with you, which used to happen in this country. You're now a terrorist. And underneath that, as you see, they start to say you've got a mental illness. If you read that quote, that would be useful.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's too small for me to see as well.
Okay, well, I'll praise it then. Basically, what it's saying is this: on Pinterest, which people should know about, is this kind of social media kind of posting site. You put up boards. People had boards which were challenging the safety of vaccines and asking questions. Some people had lost loved ones. I think in one case, a lady had lost a mum after a flu vaccine. Others had their children harmed, and they were questioning the safety. They were removed, they were deleted, and when these people wrote in or contacted and said, well, why are you doing this? They got this reply, and the reply was effectively saying that we put you in the self-harm category, and if you need any help, you can go to this link for this kind of mental illness you've got because you want to self-harm yourself because you don't want to be vaccinated. And the reason why I put those two things there is because we've seen this before. And I mentioned this before. We saw this in the Gulag, is when basically if the government doesn't like what you're saying, you start to get the label of having a mental illness or you're a terrorist. And I think that is absolutely disgraceful and people have now gone at this. And I would encourage people to go to this and if you disagree with it, to let Pinterest know how vehemently you disagree with this kind of behavior and categorization of people.
Well, let's quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. We have to condemn publicly the very idea that some people have the right to repress others. In keeping silent about evil, in burying it so deep within us that no sign of it appears on the surface, we are implanting it, and it will rise up 1,000-fold in the future. And of course, Solzhenitsyn was sentenced, I believe it was to 20 years or something, in the Siberian gulags because of his dissent against the Soviet regime.
No, absolutely. And I did put that on the last slide. I don't know if you've got that. I think it was 10 years because he wrote a letter in. He failed the social score. He wrote a letter, condemning those in power. And for that, he spent 10 years. And this is a man you want to listen to. And this is a man in great, in great detail, has looked at this at a very good level. And other people now are obviously talking about him. There's people like Jordan Peterson who speak, a very good level about this man. But, forget the academia. It's just the fact that a human being witnessed the deaths. Collectively there were, tens of millions of people killed in this regime, and you start to see the drip of it now. Well, you've got a mental illness because you don't agree with me, or you're a terrorist because you don't agree with me. And we know where this is beginning, and history has shown us where this is going to end.
Absolutely.
And people really now, they need to start saying no. We don't want this kind of behaviour.
The Gulag Archipelago. When was that published? I think in the 1970s. Might have even been a little bit before that, but I think it was around about the 70s. So close on 50-odd years ago, and actually probably a lot more pertinent today than it might have been at the time of publication. And here is Solzhenitsyn. Yeah, it was. Nearly a decade in Soviet prison. I had in my head it was a lot more than that. For criticisms he made of Stalin in a series of letters he wrote to a friend while he was fighting for the Soviet Red Army during World War II. Let your credo be this: let the lie come into the world, let it even triumph, but not through me. And I think that, that's a motto, if you like, that applies to all of us who are literally right now simply trying to stimulate people's curiosity to, take a look at what is occurring around them. Because, we're not asking anyone to take anything that we say at face value. We are simply trying to stimulate sufficient curiosity so that people aren't distracted by the circuses that are put on to keep them away from spending time and effort looking at this. But as I say, it's never been more pertinent than right now. Now, Graham, we're fast running out of time, but I do want to flag up this book, and I was making the observation. I actually ordered this book today. It should be delivered tomorrow. But the reason I ordered it was because this. I don't believe in coincidence, and this book, which was published actually a little over a year ago, has been mentioned in conversation, in random conversation that I've had with people over the last week, 10 days. And it's written by a lady by the name of Nancy McLean. And I'm going to take this extract from a review that George Monbiot wrote about it. Now, sometimes, George Monbiot, like all people, some I agree with him on some things, others I don't. But this, I absolutely endorse what he says here. Democracy in Chains actually exposes, the definition of freedom by those who think they are the rightful rulers of this planetary fiefdom. And he writes, complete freedom for billionaires means poverty, insecurity, pollution, and collapsing public services for everyone else, because we would not vote for this. So it can only be delivered through deception and authoritarian control. The choice we face is between unfettered capitalism and democracy. You cannot have both. Buchanan's program is a prescription. This is James Buchanan, who Nancy McLean is writing about, is a prescription for totalitarian capitalism. I would actually say it's totalitarian corporatism. And his disciples have only just begun to implement it. But at least, thanks to McLean's discoveries, we can now apprehend the agenda. One of the first rules of politics is know your enemy, and we're getting there. Well, I think this book is absolutely essential reading, and I'm sure that I will refer to it in more detail in a future episode of Humanity versus Insanity. And of course, this is basically Nancy McLean stumbled across the research papers and his theses of James Buchanan shortly after he died, and was actually quite shocked to comprehend the magnitude of the web that he had created and the influence that he created, not just in the US, but in the global arena. And so what he had effectively created is the template for corporate totalitarianism. So are you familiar with this book, Graham?
I think a little bit, yeah. There are some excellent texts out there, and we kind of forgot about books, haven't we? Because everything's just online, and how about read? And it's good to actually get a book and read it. As I say before, reading is an experience with picking and moving through the pages. Listen, everything is a cycle. Everything is a cycle, and we've been there. How many times has humanity been there before? And we need to learn from the past, because if we don't learn from the past, we just know where it's going to go. And people now need to be converted from complaining to doing.
Absolutely.
There's no more time for complaining. We all know what's going on, and everyone can do it. And I think that people need to get a little bit of bravery and listen to Alexander there, and don't let the lie enter you. You need to stand up. You need to be honest. You need to be honest, and you need to speak your truth. And I think those are the words that I might leave you with, Ian.
Okay, well, hey, that's you don't know it, but that's actually a great link into my closing remarks here, because I want to share some of the activities of people who are indeed taking the fight to the totalitarian corporate agenda in the UK. And this is getting sort of real close and personal right now. And let's start, of course, with these two guys. Mike Robinson and Brian Gerrish. And here they are in their beautiful new studio, looking out across Plymouth Sound. And, these guys have done an amazing job in raising awareness and stimulating curiosity, and also getting involved and helping people, not necessarily so that everybody's aware of it, but, operating quietly. And, of course, I know that Brian Gerrish, has a caseload that, is just way beyond the capabilities of one man. And, I think that there's good reason why UK Column News has gone to 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday and Friday. so that they have some time to concentrate on some of the other activities. And I do believe that UK Column is also going to go back to producing a newspaper. So I'm sure pretty much everyone watching this is a regular viewer of UK Column News. But if you can't catch it every day that it's broadcast, then do try and catch up from time to time. And this guy, Mark Steele, and this is Mark at the AV9 event earlier this year in May. And in fact, the individual DVDs and the MP4s of the AV9 presentations should be available, I'm told, within the next few days from the Alternative View website. And of course, Mark was recently gagged by Gateshead Metropolitan Borough Council because he had the audacity to actually question Gateshead Council about their LED streetlights, asking them why it is that some of these LED streetlights are on for 24 hours, especially with their constant flickering, and also asking them questions about testing 5G transmitters in the borough. Well, rather than answer his questions, they went to put a gagging order on him. And this is from the Chronicle, Gateshead Chronicle. It says, Mark Steele has been slapped with an interim order, which he claims is aimed at gagging him. Yeah, it certainly is. The order bans him from, among other things, posting pictures of councillors on Facebook. However, he's vowed to fight it in court. At a hearing he's promised will be explosive. So that court hearing is actually next. Let me see if I can get across here. Get the slides going again. There it is. It's next Thursday. So 1 week today, due to start at 10 o'clock in the morning. So if you would like to bear witness to Mark Steele challenging the Gateshead Borough Council injunction and hear Mark present his evidence that Gateshead Borough Council are actually effectively perpetrating a crime against the population of Gateshead by concealing information from the community, and certainly by gagging him and preventing him from talking about it. And another guy, of course, this is David Noakes. And this is from 4 years ago. And this was when I first became aware that David Noakes was running into some problems with the establishment, reading that NatWest had shut down his bank accounts for the company that he'd set up to produce GC MAF, which is a very effective cancer treatment. Here was David on a much earlier episode of Humanity vs. Insanity, number 37, way back in early 2015, talking about his experiences of the establishment shutting down his GC MAF production operations around Europe. And then, of course, he spoke at AV6, and the title of his presentation there was Big Pharma and the Cancer Scam. And that presentation is freely available on the Alternative View YouTube channel. And then, of course, David was actually on the last episode of Humanity vs. Insanity, a little over a month or so ago, where we discussed the role of the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority, which is effectively a pseudo-government body, but actually operating on behalf of Big Pharma. And I regret to say that since David appeared on that episode of Humanity vs. Insanity, he has, under the advice of his legal team, pleaded guilty to selling an unlicensed medicine. And this was the headline in the Mail Online: a wonder drug creator who raked in millions from fake pills made with human blood that he claimed could cure cancer. Not only did he claim, they did. But anyway, he and his business partner, his former wife, have pleaded guilty. And there is now a sentencing hearing which will commence on Monday the 19th of November at Southwark Crown Court. And I believe that there will be 2 days where witnesses can actually present evidence to mitigate his sentence. The prosecution calling for 8 years jail sentence because this man and his partner had the audacity to actually cure people of cancer. And of course, one of the tragedies is that one of the reasons for delaying the hearing for so long is that those people who have now been denied GCMAF, of course, many of them have subsequently died. So that's another date for your diary, Monday, 19th of November, at the Southwark Crown Court in London. And then myself, of course, I was in court on Tuesday, challenging the iGas injunction. And we'll be talking a little bit more about this on Fracking Nightmare later this evening. But iGas are now the 6th company to seek an injunction in the commercial courts, effectively shutting down all dissent, all peaceful protest. And so this is the commercial courts riding roughshod over parliamentary law and effectively establishing a raft of supra-parliamentary legislation which gives the corporations carte blanche to basically do whatever the hell they want. So within the commercial courts, particularly in London, of course, commerce is king, and commerce has absolute precedent over human health and well-being. So if you want to come along and see how justice isn't administered, then come along on Tuesday, the 11th of December, to the Rolls Building, which is in Fetter Lane, right in the city, London EC4A1NL. Now, it's a little over a year since I think I put out an appeal for some financial support. And so if you think that what I'm doing is useful and is helping to raise awareness, then please do consider making a donation via my website. This is ianrcrane.com. And please also note that every sale of product from my website basically goes straight back into this campaign of raising awareness of the globalist rush to rampant corporatism. And, in my opinion, there's absolutely no doubt that if we are unable to stem this agenda, then we will be condemning future generations to lives of absolutely unimaginable abject misery. So go to my website, it's ianrcrane.com, and the opportunity to donate is over on the left-hand side of the homepage there. And as we touched on earlier in the discussion with Graham, we have AV 9.1. Now, tickets will be available online from the Alternative View website. That's www.alternativeview.co.uk. It's going to take place on Sunday, the 2nd of December. And because of the cost of venues in London, we won't be announcing the venue until a little bit nearer the time, because it's actually going to depend on the number of tickets sold, because I can assure you that venues in London are horrendously expensive, but that London is without any shadow of doubt, especially on a Sunday, the easiest location to access for a significant chunk of the population. So watch this space. And who's going to be speaking? Well, I put question marks because I'm not sure that everyone's going to be still enjoying liberty at that time. I think that, some of the confrontations that we are having with the establishment, either directly or indirectly, and obviously having a serious impact on our social credit rating. So we'll see who's actually available at that time. So, Graham, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I know that you're planning on staying out of jail and being available for AV 9.1.
No, I hope so. I mean, I'm an expert witness, so there's only one side of the court that I want to see. Thank you very much. But and hopefully you'll be around, Ian, and we'll have a great day again, and we'll have some, and as we should do in England, there should be the bastion of democracy and free speech, where people used to come here in the 14th century and before to publish religious works and to speak freely because they were being persecuted everywhere else in the world. How about that, eh? How about we just do a bit of that in this country instead of all this nonsense and trying to copy some, despotic communist China and all the rest of it. So anyway, I'll be there hopefully, and we'll be getting into some very, very interesting stuff.
Well, it's about a little over a week before I'm actually due back in court. So yeah, barring sort of major catastrophe, then I shall also be there. And Brian Gerrish certainly confirmed that he would be available. So, you know, we'll have to see what happens with Mark and David. But thanks for joining me this evening, Graham. Once again, outstanding research. You know, you're absolutely on point on this agenda of artificial intelligence and social credit. And, you know, anybody who thinks this is rampant conspiracy, then you're just not paying attention, and you're certainly not reading the scripts. So thanks again, and I'll see you in a few weeks' time for episode 110. Take care now.